And welcome back. Joining me now, Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon and welcome to you both. We've just heard reports that the Taliban have started to enter the Afghan capital of Kabul from all sides. This is an AP report. We don't know much more at this point than that bare information that's been reported, but this is gravely concerning news. Afghanistan is in the grips of a serious humanitarian crisis. Joel, this is created entirely by Joe Biden's withdrawal of the troops. He was not prepared and didn't expect a Taliban resurgence. We just heard that in the clips I played from his press conference just last month in July. He said this would not happen. How did the US get this so wrong with 20 years to prepare?
G'day, Shari. Well, first of all, I should point out that it was initially Donald Trump's withdrawal, and sadly, it was a withdrawal that we were always going to have. It does appear to me that very few things were negotiated with the Taliban, or too few things at least were negotiated, and we left without leaving any rules or conditions behind. And if that report about Kabul falling is not accurate, it's inevitable in any case within the next few days. So it's a sad day, or will be a sad time when that moment comes, but it was eminently predictable. But it doesn't mean that we didn't do good things in Afghanistan, and it doesn't mean our people in Afghanistan in uniform didn't do amazing things, courageous things, skillful things on behalf of our nation.
Jason, you know, the US is now sending 5,000 troops back into the combat zone in order to evacuate their American diplomats. They're fleeing the embassy there. But what of the Afghan people?
Well, precisely, Shari. And once again, if that statement has ever been true, it has never been truer now, that those people who refuse to learn from history are doomed to relive it. You know, the fact of the matter remains that it was possible to leave people in Afghanistan. We still have peacekeeping troops in the Sinai Desert. This was a humanitarian exercise at this point. The people of Afghanistan were made promises by the West, and frankly, we have let them down. And the withdrawal by Joe Biden, because he felt that he couldn't continue on when, you know, you were more likely in the United States to die from being a police officer in Philadelphia than you were from being an active combat troop in Afghanistan. All the courage that Joel talks about of our troops, of the troops of our allies, now looks, if these reports are true, to have been for naught. And let's be very clear, there will be a lot of women who went to school because of the intervention by the Western allies who will no longer have access to education under the Taliban. This is a very sad day.
And Joel, Jason's right. You know, it's not just the opportunities that women were afforded that they will no longer have, but the fact is when Sharia law is imposed and as the Taliban sweeps through Afghanistan, the bloodshed, the death toll, the number of people who are displaced. I mean, this is now going to be one of the worst, you know, one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the globe at the moment.
And certainly the situation is bad, Shari, but we went initially into Afghanistan with a very good purpose, and that is to stop Afghanistan continuing to be a breeding ground and training camp for terrorists who would do bad things right around the world, including
and we failed.
Australians.
We failed.
No, we haven't. No, well, I don't think we have failed.
The Taliban is a terror group, and it's now stronger than ever.
Please let me finish, Shari. No, we did not fail on that mission. Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden were driven out of Afghanistan, and I'm going to make a brave prediction. I doubt that the new Taliban regime will offer host to terrorist groups into the future. But that mission was complete a long time ago, arguably prior to 2007. What the West has been trying to do in Afghanistan since that time, with a great deal of frustration, is to build their economic capacity, build a health system, an education system, train the Afghan National Army, and the Afghan National Police in order for them to maintain the peace and government control in that country. But that has failed dismally. And the reason the Taliban has been able to move so rapidly is that the opposition has basically acquiesced and just let them run. In some cases, many cases, in fact, join them. So the question becomes, will Afghanistan be a better place for our 20 years of intervention? It's an open question, but certainly we've kept Australians safe for the last 2 decades, and I think they'll be safer in the future. It's hard to see it being a good place. In fact, it's going to be a terrible place. Will it be the worst place in the world when compared to Yemen and Somalia and southern Sudan? No, it won't be. And we can't stick around there forever trying to make it a better place. So the US withdrawal is not a Biden withdrawal, it's an American withdrawal. And it was a long time coming. I thought it was done badly in the end. But as Jason points out, Afghans have had a taste of democracy. We'll see where that takes them. I hope the Taliban has learned its lesson on hosting terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. Close to a generation of girls have enjoyed an education, which can be which I think is an encouraging thing for the country. But certainly at the moment, it's going to hell in a basket. There's no doubt about that.
All right. Well, look, I'm sure we'll keep examining this closely in the weeks to come. I want to get onto the IPCC report. This is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that was out this week. It was called a Code Red on Climate Change, and it predicts the planet will warm by 1.5 degrees within 12 years. Jason, you're now calling on the Prime Minister to update the government's 2030 emissions reduction target before the next election. This is something Scott Morrison will continue to resist, isn't it?
Well, Shari, it goes to my point that the Liberal Party is great at policy outcomes and we are so often miserable at political outcomes. At the moment, under our modelling, we will exceed our 2030 target by about 400 million tonnes of CO2, yet we will not take credit for it. John Howard made this mistake in 2007, where Australia was actually ahead of its Kyoto protocols, and he refused to sign the agreement and got punished at the ballot box because of his refusal to sign something that we were meeting and beating at the time. It just seems to me logical, sensible, and frankly good politics for us to recognise what we're already doing, which is we're ahead of these targets. And when you look at our projections from 2008 to
But Jason, there isn't a current target. But Jason, there isn't a current target, so that's not something that your party's already doing.
Sorry, well, no. Under the Paris Agreement, we have agreed to reduce our carbon emissions by 26 to 28% by 2030. We, at the moment, on our projections and our forecasts, and by the way, Shari, compared to the rest of the world, we have one of the most accurate accountings of greenhouse gas emissions anywhere on the planet. We get no credit for that either. As a political party, we will beat those targets by 400 million tonnes.
Just to clarify this here, Jason Falinski, because you are from the moderate arm of the Liberal Party. I know you like to call it the modern Liberals. You've had a rebranding, but you are the moderate or left faction of the Liberal Party. So just to be clear, very quickly before I get Joel's point of view, you are now pushing for the Prime Minister to adopt a target of net zero emissions by 2050.
Oh, yes, we are, yes.
Yeah, okay. Joel, would you like to respond to what Jason has said there? I mean, in total, there's 130 countries who've committed to a target of net zero by 2050. Do you think Australia should commit to this as well?
Shari, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but can I also make the point that all the states, all the territories, 190 of the 200 top ASX companies in Australia have also committed to net zero by 2050.
Well, Jason, I just have to point out to you that half of your party doesn't agree with you and neither does the Nationals. But let's hear from Joel.
It's good to see, Shari, that climate change is causing more division in the coalition parties these days than it is in the Labor Party, because the Labor Party has a settled position on this. We are committed to net zero emissions by 2050. And if it's true that we are going to meet and beat our 2030 target, as the Prime Minister constantly claims, then we can afford to be a little more ambitious. Why? Because we have a strong history both in innovation and technology. But we need to remember, I think, at least four key points. First of all, if we're going to go down this path of greater ambition, we have to embrace all the opportunities, not just renewable energy, as important as that is, but low emission technologies, Shari, including carbon capture and storage and blue hydrogen, for example. The list is very long. Second, we have to accept that our coal-fired generators have to stay in, or should stay in the system to the end of their physical and economic lives. In the case of Liddell, that's 2 years. In the case of the youngest in Queensland, it's 2050. But they are critical to keeping the system stable and indeed getting more renewables into the system. Third, we need to continue to export both coal and gas, because that's helping developing nations, Shari, bring their emissions down. And four, but very importantly, we need more focus on technologies that absorb more carbon out of the atmosphere. Soil health, soil carbon, the government's been talking about it for years, but it's done very little about it. And forestry, Shari. You know, the government promised 1 billion new trees in the plantation estate in 2018. At the current rate, we will get there in 300 years, Shari. Plant trees, create jobs, stop importing timber, and use those plantations to absorb very large amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere.
Okay. Joel, sounds like you have a platform to challenge Albo as leader. Joel Fitzgibbon and Jason Falinski, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Shari.
Thanks, Jason.